The reason you have the phrase as above, so below, in many ways relates to the idea of that which occurs within the higher frequency versions of reality, what you consider to be the subtle realms, the realms of spirit, will always have a manifestation effect within the idea of your physical lives. So understand the reason you are experiencing the idea of your global event you consider to be your coronavirus, as well as the many other collective events, globally speaking, that are occurring for you, is because of energies that have been building within your collective unconscious. For understand, everything you experience in your physical reality, first and foremost, has an origin point in the idea of that non-physical level of yourselves you call your collective unconscious, your collective subconscious. And the idea is that when certain energies in that more spiritualized levels of your consciousness reach a particular peak, you will then experience that energy playing out in the physical reality. Now, understand that just as there are infinite versions of your physical reality available to you, playing out side by side with one another simultaneously, that is also present in spirit. In other words, there are alternate versions of your collective unconscious that exist side by side with one another. And in that sense, it is your frequency in the physical reality that actually determines which version of your collective unconscious you are aligning with, and that then determines how your collective reality unfolds. Many of you are familiar with what has been called the idea of the astral realm, and understand that at certain levels of the astral realm, there is a particular level that is similar to a blueprint. And this is where you have the idea of the following availability. The ability to select different phenomena, different occurrences from the series of collective unconscious energies in a way that is personalized to your preferred frequency, to your preferred experience. That blueprint in many ways then becomes the foundation for how you create the idea of your personal unfolding in your personal reality that you are creating. Now understand, the process of creating one's reality occurs both consciously and unconsciously. What we mean by that is the following. You are creating your experience of physical reality from the idea of that spirit level, from that astral level, where you're selecting energies from the idea of the different versions of the collective unconscious for your blueprint. And you then add on to that, you then create more and create with that whilst you are awake consciously in your physical reality with the idea of your state of being and your choices. So your process of creating your reality experience occurs when you are both asleep and when you are awake, when you are both dreaming and when you are moving throughout your physical reality. So you're constantly creating, whether you recognize it or not. Now, in relationship to the idea of the different frequency versions of your collective unconscious, you select the version of your collective unconscious that you channel most prominently into your individual experience based off of your frequency in the now. So when you are in a more positive frequency, when you are expressing your true self whilst you are awake in your physical reality, you are aligning energetically to the idea of a more positive expression of your collective unconscious. And in that sense, it allows for you to begin to experience within your physical reality the idea of a more preferred, a more positive, a more vibrant collective reality experience. When your individual vibration is more negative, whilst you are awake, moving throughout your reality, it's as if you are tuning into a more negative collective version of your collective unconscious, and that creates the idea of a more negative expression of your collective reality that you perceive whilst you are awake. Now, going back to the idea of what we opened with, as above, so below, enough of your collective unconscious versions have reached within themselves a certain frequency. a frequency that represents the idea of a new level, a new octave of embodiment of what you consider to be the frequencies that are natural to who you are. As we have said, there are multiple versions of your collective unconsciousness that you're plugging into and plugging out of and plugging into and plugging out of based on your frequency while you're awake that have reached within their own collective energy a new level of embodiment of the heart, of the energies of unconditional love. So that means that even though you have the ability to plug into positive versions of the collective unconscious and negative versions of the collective unconscious, the idea is that enough of them have reached a certain threshold, have reached a new level, where the idea is that the way that they play out in your physical reality, these collective energies can no longer look the same as they used to look. In other words, your collective unconscious and its multiple versions have transformed so much that no matter which ones you plug into, your physical reality will continue to look very different because you're plugging into very new, upgraded, updated versions of your collective energies. So no matter what you choose, no matter what your frequency is, you will continuously be experiencing very different versions of Earth that are very different than what you're used to. Now, as we have said, there are some collective frequencies of that unconscious that are more positive and more negative. In general, they have all reached a particular upgrade. However, they do not all lead to what you consider to be positive timelines, despite the idea of that heart embodiment. For understand that it's as if you are selecting the idea of different narratives for your collective when you plug in to certain realities. You can plug in, so to say, to a very positive collective narrative. You can plug in, so to say, to a very negative collective narrative. And the idea is that these narratives, which are linked to different versions of the collective unconscious, have a particular momentum. And the idea is that each of them are accelerating into their own unique direction, into their own unique manifestations. Some of them relate to that which you prefer, some of them do not. The idea is you determine which version you're lining up with based off of your frequency. Now, for whatever reason, many of you have chosen to plug into certain collective narratives that are less positive, and you may be observing the idea of that playing out in your reality around you. There may be things like rioting. There may be things like protests with certain elements of chaos that you don't prefer. There may be certain elements of sickness happening around you. Now, as we have said, each of these versions of the collective unconscious have reached a certain level, a certain threshold where there is a particular embodiment of that heart energy. How that translates into your physical reality is the following. In those more negative collective narratives, you have the opportunity to fully immerse yourself completely, totally, utterly into the vibration, into the frequency of unconditional love in a way that will slingshot you to a very positive timeline, to a very positive frequency version of Earth, yourself, and your life. That is what the upgrade has allowed. Even if you're experiencing a negative collective narrative, you have the ability, because of the collective upgrade, to slingshot into the reality of your preference, regardless of if your timeline appears to be more positive or less positive. That availability to slingshot into the direction of your preference is now very available to you in a way that it had not been before, in relationship to the idea of the very positive timelines that you're experiencing. Many of you who are experiencing this have the ability to now slingshot yourself even more fully into those positive directions, allowing for you to experience even more positive manifestations, even more positive synchronicities. So whether your collective narrative appears to be very positive or very negative, the ability to transform in relationship to the direction of your preference is now incredibly available to you. That door is wide open.